Welcome to Trash Compactor. I'm Josh, and today we have two very special guests, my sister, Allie,
Hi.
and my brother-in-law, her husband, Sean.
Hello.
What spurred this episode initially is, I believe you mentioned once upon a time a while back that you two were marathoning all of the Star Wars movies in chronological order ahead of, I think, the premiere of one of the shows. Does that sound right?
I think it was actually after Mandalorian started,
Okay,
and Allie was looking for context.
sort of. Well, depends on if you count Boba Fett as Mandalorian or not. Um, it was after Boba Fett. So you said, "Hey, do you want to watch Boba Fett with me?" And I was like, "I don't know. I know some Star Wars here, and I don't know, maybe sure." And then we started watching it, and I think the second episode really grabbed me, and then I was like kind of hooked. And then I was like, "Okay, And so then, of course, partway through the season, it became there were many episodes that were just about Mando and Grogu, and then I was like, okay, now I want to go back and watch Mandalorian, and you were like, well, it might make more sense if we watch like the movies, and I had seen all of the movies except for Phantom Menace.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but not in a like I'm really invested in the lore kind of way, just kind of in passing, if that makes
Right.
sense. Yeah, so I mean, I'd seen episodes 4, 5, and 6 in high school, and then at some point a few years ago, I think one of my roommates had 2 and 3, and I was like, sure. Oh, no, no, no. I think we saw Rogue One. I went to see Rogue One, loved it, and then I
Ah,
was like, now I want to watch 4, 5, and 6 again, and then was like, okay,
got
this is
it.
great. And then I was like, I should probably watch 2 and 3 because my roommate had them, or I might have seen. Actually, no, I think I saw 2 and 3 in the theaters, but I didn't really remember them. Like I didn't really have like the context for them so much.
Yeah, well, that's sort of what I was thinking when I was putting notes together to do this episode. The impetus was this chronological marathon that you told me about, which I guess sounds like you did it around the time I started this podcast, actually.
Yeah,
But then I started thinking more about, this podcast is also kind of in spite of itself or not, has also become something of an exploration of my personal history with Star Wars. It's sort of a, going through the Star Wars movies and Star Wars things as I encountered them. And that's kind of intertwined with my own personal history with Star Wars. So got me thinking about your personal history with Star Wars and how it was different from mine. And I'm just wondering,
it's a little
um,
bit of an understatement. Yes.
well, no, I'm just wondering, Allie, what your memories of Star Wars are, how you first encountered Star Wars, if you can recall what those encounters were like when you were a kid.
I don't remember how I first encountered Star Wars because I feel like it was always a given that it was there because you were so into Star Wars. And
Mm.
I remember really liking Spaceballs. And I remember you telling me and being very frustrated that I didn't get the jokes. So you did not understand at all why I liked Spaceballs. And honestly, watching it later, like when I think I watched it when I was like 13 and was like, oh, like I didn't know, those things when you watch a movie and all the adult humor goes over you. So like
Yes.
there's that, but then also like I remember you being like, you don't get why Pizza the Hut is funny, and I was like, no, it's like Pizza Hut, and you're like, no, but you don't. I remember that very specifically, and
That's funny. I don't remember that.
I did really like Spaceballs. I don't know, um, but yeah, and then 4, 5, and 6. I couldn't tell you the first time I saw them. I remember watching them in high school with friends of mine, but it was like, oh, we're gonna go back and rewatch them. I don't remember the first time I watched them because I just feel like they were always there.
Yeah, well, you definitely had seen them before you were in high school because I remember
Oh no,
watching
I
them with
definitely have.
you.
I just that I
Yeah.
have a distinct memory of watching them in high school. I don't have any
Yeah.
distinct memories before that, but I definitely watched them.
Yeah, I have this memory. It's a weirdly specific memory, but there's this one part in The Empire Strikes Back toward the end when they're escaping from Cloud City and 3PO had been in pieces on Chewbacca's back. And they finally get back to the Falcon and they're escaping, and you know, 3PO is laying in pieces on the ground, and he sees R2D2 for the first time, and R2D2 beeps something, and 3PO says, "Well, of course I've looked better." And we thought it was so funny, and we kept rewinding it so we could hear him say that line again and again.
Wait, we as in you and me?
Yes, we as in you and me.
That's adorable. I have no memory of that, but I wish I did.
That
That's
is,
so cute.
that is
Well, you
adorable.
were, well, yeah. I mean, you were younger than me, but we thought it was the funniest thing. So, which
Aw,
is something that,
so
you know, uh,
cute.
which is something funny too, because, you know, so this season on Trash Compactor, we're covering the prequels, and I've been having a lot of conversations with people our age and a little older about the Star Wars prequels. And, you know, a recurring theme, something that keeps coming up again and again, is problems with the humor seems to
Mhm.
be a big stumbling block.
I mean,
And then,
that's a problem that I don't know. Actually, maybe I shouldn't even because you're not up to the sequels yet. But I feel like in the fandom, that seems to be a thing that people have issues with in the sequel trilogy as well.
well, see, I don't have a problem with the humor in the sequels like nearly as much as
No, I
the,
don't either. I just
as with,
that's what it made
yeah.
me think of.
Well, the interesting thing though is that, you know, whenever I critique something or I have a criticism of something that's supposed to be humorous in any of the prequel movies, I think about moments like that where I'm like, no, like this is, it's like, I feel like I have to check myself. I'm like, but this is really for, you know, 11-year-olds, and would they laugh at this?
Yeah,
And a lot of times, even where the prequels are concerned, my answer is still no, but I have to, like, we were talking about Attack of the Clones specifically, and like there's this whole running gag and the end battle about how 3PO gets his head on a battle droid, and it's like these like shenanigans where his head keeps on moving, and there are these horrible puns, like his head like falls off and he's being dragged along next to his body, and he's like, "Oh, I'm quite beside myself." And it's just stuff like that. I'm just like, maybe humor for 11-year-olds works the closer you are to that age, and the older you get, the more you try
I
to
can't.
do what you thinking.
I can't totally relate to you there just because I love puns. Like I get the
Okay,
like,
fair.
the I get
Well, what's tricky in
the
the case of Star Wars is that the context and the tone, like on the one hand, it's like this very dramatic, intense kind of a battle sequence. Like I get intellectually you want to kind of, you know, punctuate it with some moments of levity.
mhm.
But there's some stuff there that's just so, it's not that it's not funny. It's just, it's so not funny in the context. But Allie, so I'm wondering, do you have any other memories that stand out of Star Wars when you were a kid? I guess I'm specifically curious about when the prequel movies came out because I was so fanatical about them.
I really only remember. Well, so I like now thinking about it. I did see episodes 2 and 3 in the theaters. Episode 1 for some reason I never saw in the theater, and like I said, I didn't watch it until like last year, ever. But I do remember how excited you were to see it, and that you had gotten before it came out. You had gotten like four like tickets to see it like 4 times that weekend.
Yeah, I don't recall specifically. There's been a topic of much contention, and it's making me realize how old I actually am. That I have like no memory of these things. That at one time I would have been able to recount to you chapter and verse, like the
Yeah.
number of times and the places. And
Well,
I'm
so
just like, yeah, I don't know. That's
I've
gone.
always thought it was 4 times, but it might be one of those things that at some point the amount of times changed, and I just kept telling myself it was 4. But I have a very distinct memory of it being 4. But I don't. I can admit that that might be wrong. I do remember, and I feel like Mom tells the story all the time. That then I also heard on the podcast the other day about you guys like being set up to camp out, and you were the only ones there, and then they let you in early to see it, which is super cool. Um, I did after we listened to that episode, I texted Chris and was like, I really think you're wrong about Josh seeing it before that because Mom has I feel like I've heard that story so many times about oh my gosh, Josh was camping out with his friends and they even got let in to see it early. Like I never heard that you saw it before them, and I think
No,
that Chris is mixing something up.
I don't think he is. I think he's
Oh,
right. I think it's a
really?
gap in my yeah. I think it's a gap in my memory. Yeah, because as soon as he said that, I was like, wait, huh?
And mom's memory?
Yeah, she wouldn't know. She
Yeah,
wouldn't
she
know.
would. Oh,
No, she wouldn't.
all right. I think she would.
No, she wouldn't know when I saw it the first time.
Okay.
Sorry, mom.
Well,
Um,
now I feel silly that I called Chris out, and you're like, no, he was
no, yeah, I'm pretty sure he's right. But what still, you still have in your, on your side of the ledger is I still can't remember exactly what the circumstances were.
early.
I don't remember. That's the whole point.
It doesn't make any sense.
He's got a feeling that he saw it before then.
All right.
When Chris said that and the specific anecdote he recalled, that sounds right. That sounds right to me. That stirs something. Anyway,
I remember asking you how it was, and you seemed disappointed, but I don't think you would say that it was bad. Like you didn't want to put it down, but you also were like, I don't know that I needed to see it that many times in a row. Like you were very like, oh my god, I can't believe that I like kind of sat through it that many times.
well, that certainly sounds true. Yeah, no,
But
no, because
you were definitely disappointed, but you weren't like, oh, it was terrible. I don't know. And I don't know if that was you being like, you're still like, I can't put down the great George Lucas, or if you really were like, it's not a terrible movie. It's just not as great as I was built it up to be in my head before I saw
yeah,
it.
those were interesting times. Sean, I'm wondering what your memories were of seeing the prequel specifically, but of Star Wars in general. I'm wondering what your uh, sort of the arc of your relationship with the Phantom Menace, what that was like.
Oh, I'm very happy to talk about that. I'm a little bit older than you.
Hmm.
So when Return of the Jedi came out, I was 3, which is too young to remember seeing it. But we had it on laserdisc. Uh,
Wow.
we had New Hope on laserdisc. I actually still have that laserdisc. And like halfway through the movie, with a lot of laserdisc, you had to like put it back in, take it out, flip it
Flip
over,
it over.
and then put it back. Um, when I was a kid, Empire Strikes Back was my favorite. I don't know exactly why, but I watched that over and over again. I think it was probably Yoda.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I loved Return of the Jedi too. But then, as you know, but maybe a little bit more pronounced for me because I'm older than you are, there was this dearth of Star Wars content where there was
Yep.
nothing. Even before you got into like the good books, right? There was this gap. So I had like Sabak on my Windows 95 computer, and I had at that time. Do you remember zip disks?
Of course I do. I still have some in our parents' house in a drawer somewhere. Yeah.
I had a
I had
zip
all
disk.
my important backup files on a zip disk.
You had to 100 megs,
Yeah.
and I had a zip disk full of what I can only describe as the original Wikipedia before there
Yeah.
was a Wikipedia. You had like this is what Keswick is like, and the Mount Calamari, and all the ships and everything. And then my dad was a supervisor at a recycling plant, and every once in a while he would bring me back like a jewel that someone had tried to recycle. He'd take it off the line, and it was Heir to the Empire, and that was my introduction really to the Star Wars novels. And from there, I consumed that trilogy, the Jedi Academy trilogy, the Tales from Mos Eisley, the Courtship of Princess Leia, that one that I can't remember, but takes place in like the outer rim with the. That might be Courtship of Princess Leia. No, uh, the one with the like the weird aliens that are coming from like the very edge of the
Yeah,
galaxy.
yeah, the New Jedi Order uh series. It was like a whole interconnected thing of like 17 novels. Like that was in the later 90s. I think there was actually perhaps some crossover with the prequel era.
Yeah,
Um,
and
yes, the
and
one where they
go ahead.
there's the one where they kill Chewbacca in the first book.
Okay, that's where I stopped. No,
Yeah.
I refuse to read that.
Oh, you're one of those. Yeah.
I I am. Can I?
I
I
love
don't
you so
know what
much.
your level of like swearing is on this, but
It's anything goes.
I was like, no goddamn motherfucker is allowed to kill off Chewbacca
Oh my
in
god.
a book.
Well, to be fair, I think I think they crushed him with like a whole planet. So
And
he went out. He
that
went
was
out.
the problem
Oh,
because
wasn't it?
my understanding is he needs to get Jaina and Jace and maybe little Anakin onto a ship,
Yeah.
right? But for some reason he can't get on the ship, and then a moon crushes him. And
Yes.
and I feel like if Chewbacca is gonna die, he needs to go down under a pile of bodies.
Fair.
I I feel like that, like a Cleon. I feel like that's the way
Yeah, I
he'd
guess
want.
no, that's fair. I guess there's some there's some overlap with the Klingon and Wookiee sort of vibes, I think. So yeah, so he would
And
have to go. Yeah, okay, all right.
not to skip ahead to Force Awakens, but if they had killed Chewbacca on the planet right after Han dies, I
Right.
would have been okay with that. You
Well,
know,
yeah, because yeah, it's sort of like, he goes down without it's like he goes down with the ship. It's like, if Han's gone, well then all bets are off. Then I'm
right,
throwing in the towel.
right. There's
Um
58 dead stormtroopers, and then Chewbacca dies, and I'm okay with that. But anyway, sorry. So I consume those vigorously. Talos of Mos Eisley might be one of my favorite non-Heir to the Empire stories. I just love those little like insights into the characters of the cantina. Um,
yeah, I
and then
remember those books.
the I watched the special editions in theaters when they came out. I was disappointed with the additional scenes. Um, Greedo shooting first,
Well, that's
and
the big one.
yeah, I mean that's the huge one. But I felt like a lot of it didn't really add anything. And then there were like these weird like technical errors that they left in, like the you can see the mats around the TIE fighters.
Yeah, which is weird too, because that's one of the things that they said that they fixed, yet you could still see them. There was another thing too that they left in. Like, uh, I just discovered this one not that long ago. Like, there's a shot in A New Hope where Luke is in his X-wing cockpit in the end battle sequence over the Death Star, and like one of like the tiny windows in the cockpit is still blue screen. Like they just, I guess, like nobody noticed it. And I was like, huh, because what I was like close examining and zooming in on like was the Disney Plus version. So it was the latest and greatest, like has been reworked a zillion times.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, that's a legitimate mistake that surely somebody who's doing any kind of revisions, edits, revamps to this movie would have caught, and they just did not fix it.
So other than the two Ewok movies, there was no substantial like media other than books to consume. And
Right.
so, and I know that like Caravan of Courage wasn't popular and still isn't, but I loved it as a kid.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, then once again, I think for the intended audience, I don't think some of these things that we think of as like mistakes or misfires are actually hitting right on target. I think
Is it that one or the other one where the family dies at the beginning?
that the other one, a
Okay.
battle for Endor,
Yeah, Battle for Endor. That one I liked a
in
lot.
a very oh, so you like the one where the family dies at the beginning?
Yes, with the exception of that part, because they do that. They have those like life scan sensors for each family member on their wrist, and then as
Mm.
each one dies, the main character watches their family members' life scan signatures bleep out, and it's a very kind of morbid thing for Star Wars.
No, it's very dramatic. It's a very cool concept. It's just like, this is a movie for like 6-year-olds, bro. Like, what are you doing?
Right? I don't know.
um,
There was something about it that I liked.
well, there's something that I have come to believe. I should give credit to the originator. Her name is Elizabeth Sandifer. She's a comics writer and a critic. She's primarily known for her work on Doctor Who, but she also has written some Star Wars criticisms. And she always says that the best children's media fucks you up just the right amount for life. Right?
Like a Treo in the swamp.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So, and I kind of agree with that, because it's sort of like children's media is basically teaching kids how to live in the world, like what real life is like, what the real world is like. And I think that, it's a safe way to kind of help them make sense of the inexplicable, the unfair, the horrific. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, the best, most effective children's media is the kind of stuff that like really gets to you, but not so much that you'll never watch it again. And I also think that the best children's media kind of goes over your head a little bit, but not so much that you're not connecting with it.
So you have something to reach for.
Yeah, yeah. Like for example, the politics in the Phantom Menace, I think, goes over a lot of kids' head. But you have a sense that there's something going on and it's important. You don't know exactly what it means or the details of it, but you have a sense that there's something there. Or like in my case, like the stuff with Yoda and The Empire Strikes Back, I didn't necessarily know exactly what he was talking about when he was dispensing all of this sort of Eastern philosophy and Buddha's wisdom. But, now as an adult, I'm like, oh, I see what lessons they are trying to impart in children.
Mhm.
I see what he's talking about. Whereas when I was a kid, it was probably more like, I don't really know what that means, but it sounds real important. So I'll just kind of go with it.
So to circle back to your original question,
Yeah,
Phantom,
Phantom Menace. Yeah.
when that trailer hit, it set my life on fire. That trailer was astounding. You see the double lightsaber, and you have this obviously some kind of Sith Lord, and my friends and I were super geeky excited about it. When did that come out? 99?
The movie
Yeah, the
came out.
trailer came out, I think it may have come out in 98, in around November 98, but I'm not 100%. I know there was a second trailer that came out in like March, April 99. Trailer B, as
Okay.
it's known in the biz.
In the biz.
Um,
Yeah. In November 98, I was 18 years old, and I was still 100% all the way psyched for it. I feel like we had never seen a trailer like that for any other movie. I think definitely not for any kind of franchise movie or anything that you looked forward to. And then finally to have Star Wars back again on the big screen, it was mind blowing. And growing up, I had heard like in interviews or whatever, people who talked about seeing A New Hope for the first time in theaters and describing it as magic. Like the whole experience was magical, and I was like, yes, finally, I get to sup at that table. But then it didn't satiate necessarily that hunger all the way for that magic.
so let me ask you then, Sean, was that something that you knew by your first viewing that these weren't the droids you're looking for, or was it sort of, did it take a little longer for it to sink in? Because it's an interesting phenomenon I've noticed with a lot of Star Wars fans. Like, we're so invested with the movie being good, the idea that it could be anything less than the most amazing thing we'd ever seen was hard to get to.
I think it took a little while because I think that initial like riding the roller coaster of it's finally here. It's been what 23 years or however long it is. I'm not good at math and my memory's terrible.
16 years since Return of the Jedi.
All right, 16 years since Return of the
Yeah.
Jedi. I think just being there, and it was so overwhelming, and the action sequences were fantastic. I think the CGI probably would still, for the most part, hold up pretty well, with some notable exceptions. But on rewatch, I feel like the pacing on the more political things are really lags, and now I have trouble staying awake during some of those parts. But and I'm
Well, that
into
could
that.
just also, I mean, that could just also be a little bit of age. I mean, let's be honest. Like, I have trouble staying awake during things sometimes as well.
It could be.
Josh.
Yes.
Um, so I know that you and Sean like know each other, but you've never met in person, and like I don't know if you realized how big of a Star Wars fan he is. So I just wanted to share. You did tell me, I believe, when we were doing our watch through, that you grew your hair out,
Oh,
and I wanted that to be shared. That's how big of a Star Wars fan Sean has been his whole life.
I attempted a Padawan braid after episode
Really?
one. Yes. I
Wow.
I had traditionally shaved my head very short, like a buzz cut. And then after episode one, I had attempted to grow out just that hair so that it could be braided.
So you couldn't have hated it that much.
No, I didn't hate it. No, I definitely
Yeah.
didn't hate it. I definitely didn't hate it. It was super exciting in theaters, and no, but given time, I've come to different conclusions.
I thought you were gonna say you wanted to be a Wookiee or something, but that makes much more sense.
It's more attainable.
I probably would have explained it better if I could remember the word Padawan. But I was like, you can grow his hair. Sean, you can take it now. After
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking
So
about.
when I would buzz my hair, I would skip that bit right there by the ear,
Right.
and I never really got it long enough. Thankfully, probably.
Does it ever kind of twig you out? Like every once in a while in pop culture, like I'll hear like a Star Wars prequel reference, and it always blows my mind that the prequels have also entered pop culture to some degree. Like the word I hear quite often, well, not quite often, but the word I've heard more than once in like random pop culture is Padawan. Like, oh, my young Padawan.
Mm, yeah. No, it does.
Yeah, I'm always like, really weird.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like that was 24 years ago,
Yeah.
but it was. It feels more like maybe 6. But my ability to track time is severely lacking.
Yeah.
So no, it does surprise me. Yeah.
I do have one more memory of Josh with Star Wars. You'll probably remember which version of Windows this was, but you had a computer where you installed something on Windows. So when you booted your computer up, it said, "Patience, young Jedi." Oh, Windows 98 is loading. It was Windows 98. Patience, young Jedi. Windows 98 is loading.
I have no memory of that, but that sounds indisputably correct.
Yep. So, could I just say, though, that you had asked us to do this podcast with you, and it had been like close to, if not already a year since we'd done the rewatch.
Ye-
Well, rewatch of most of them for me, except rewatch plus Phantom Menace for me. And Sean was like, okay, we should probably rewatch them again because I don't remember like exactly, when I watched them with you, like what your reactions were and what so we were gonna rewatch them and we started with the Phantom Menace and partway through I was like, I don't think I can do this again. Like and then we got busy and didn't watch the rest of them, but like Phantom Menace, I was like, I don't want to watch this one again. Like I was like, there's a reason why that was the only one I'd never seen, and I was like, yeah, I'm kind of fine with seeing it the one time. I mean, I like Qui-Gon a lot. There's things that are nice about it, but as a whole, it's like it's not great to sit through, unfortunately.
I am a person that's into like political intrigue, and like you can definitely keep me interested in like trade disputes and stuff like that, but I feel like there's just something missing
Yeah.
from all of that. 'Cause a lot of Star Trek is kind of like that. It's that drier, more political stuff, and I'll drink from that cup all day long. But I don't know if it's the dialogue or the pacing or the direction.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to put my finger on as well. Something we were talking about in our Phantom Menace pod is the way that the movie has all these threads, but they never really seem cohesive. It's like
Yeah.
it kind of feels like you're in like 3 or 4 different movies. And I think, just for me, the stakes of the political stuff aren't clear.
Yeah.
and it's only, like they call it refrigerator logic. It's stuff that you don't really think about until, you wake up in the middle of the night to get a glass of water and you're standing by the fridge and you're like, oh, that's what that meant. But usually those things aren't supposed to be like central plot points of the movie that you're
Yeah.
watching. It seems like the intent of the political subplot should have been clearer in order to make the stakes clearer beyond some like vague, like, oh, the government is bad and it's not helping us, so we have to fix it ourselves. And it's not really clear exactly why things are going on the way that they're going on, when I think it's a pretty compelling thesis. Like, as a mission statement for Star Wars, it's basically saying, corporate greed is the root of all evil, is basically what it's saying. And it's saying, government has to stand as a bulwark to greed. And when it doesn't, then you get fascism. I mean, I'm on board with that, but like, that is just, it's very unclear that that's what the movie is trying to say.
Yeah.
I feel like, to flash forward to much more recently, I feel like Andor handles it really well. There's a lot of political intrigue in there. There's a lot of political discussion. There's a lot of fascist ideologies that are being displayed, and they do it so well. So we know that it works.
Yeah.
And
Andor was wonderful. I kind of am still in shock at how amazing it was. And it makes you like really think about the consequences of being a rebel, and like, and all of that really works for me because I'm in a lot of leftist circles, and we kind of like think about that kind of stuff, like, okay, if you're going to be nonviolent, there's consequences to that. And then if you're going to be violent, there's consequences to that. Like the extremes of different ways of like trying to overthrow fascism.
Yeah, well, to be fair, yeah, like I agree with you. I think that Andor is fantastic and amazing. And the thing that I kind of struggle with, my one criticism, which isn't even a criticism, is like, is it too good to be Star Wars? And I don't mean that in a facile way. Like, what I'm saying is, like, Star Wars was never a site for that kind of like really authentic rendering of like real revolution or like social change.
But it makes sense that it can be though.
It makes sense that it can be. It
Yeah,
makes
when
sense that it can be.
you look at the real world allegories from, the original trilogy, like they didn't go into it that hard, like emotionally and like, I don't know, grittiness wise, but really, like it totally makes sense that you
Right.
could take
No,
it
but
that like they, this was like
yes.
children's cartoon that all of a sudden like people are dying in and it's gory. Like it makes sense. I do see what you're saying, and that's kind of actually what I was thinking when you said something about, I think one of the books Sean had mentioned. You're like, this is a children's movie, guy, and I was thinking, well, yeah, you could have the same criticism though about Andor, which I guess is now you're saying you kind of do.
Well, no, but I mean, I don't think that Andor is a children's show,
No, it's
though.
totally
Look, right. So I mean, that's my point. Like, and I think, when we live in a media kind of ecosystem where, the strategy is divide the audience into segments and give each one exactly their version of Star Wars, and that's like how you get the like platter of Star Wars. Like, what it kind of does is, you know, Andor can coexist with all these other flavors of Star Wars, but I don't think it can stand as like the quintessential Star Wars,
yeah.
because it's not for kids. It's not like, I think, Star Wars is kind of simplistic. And again, I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I mean it, in a way that hints at these larger things in a way that may go over kids' heads, but isn't too much for them to grapple with. Like, if you set a 9-year-old in front of Andor, if you showed a 9-year-old season one of Andor, like, I don't think they would even be able to sit through it.
Yeah. Like I'm glad that Brelin actually isn't interested in that because
Um, Though that
uh,
said, like, I don't think, like just as a piece of drama, like just as a TV series, like Andor may be as good as Star Wars has ever been on that front. Like, when you're judging it solely, in those terms, but I think as Star Wars, I don't think I could bring myself to say it is the best Star Wars there is.
Oh, I
Does
see
that
what
make
you mean.
sense?
Hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've been having a lot of thoughts about, actually not about Star Wars, but about um, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We saw Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which I know you're not into Marvel, so I don't know. Like, but I mean, I'm sure you're friends with a lot of people who are into Marvel. Guardians of the Galaxy 3, that is the most I've cried at a movie ever. If we weren't in the theater, I would have been bawling, like wailing. I never want to sit through that movie again. I'm really glad I saw it because I care about these characters, but I'm really sensitive to animal stuff. And I did see in interviews, it was like hinted at like that it would be tough, but they're the marketing for it though, like should not, like, kids should not see this movie. It was like hard. I'm weeks later, I'm still like grappling with this movie. It was like traumatic to sit through.
Oh.
And I've seen a lot of other people say the same thing and put like trigger warnings. There's like articles about how it should come with a trigger warning, and none of that is in the marketing. And then, McDonald's has like Happy Meal toys, which like makes sense sort of for the first two movies. It does
Well,
not
that's
make sense
interesting.
movie. So it just gets real dark. And yeah. So I don't, but like, but Andor I don't isn't like marketed to kids. I think Star Wars is more like they market it. There's so many different pieces now that they market it to who they like. There's like a cartoon on Disney Plus. God, I don't remember what it's called, but it's like shorts.
Younglings.
Is it Younglings?
I
Is that
think it's
it?
Younglings.
It's like
No,
shorts
they're,
for like preschoolers, and you
yeah,
know that's not marketed to adults. They're not like, oh, you have to watch this, or else you're gonna like miss out on canon, or
yeah,
Whereas I think
yeah.
with Marvel, they might need to figure out how to kind of be a little more, I don't know, market. I don't know. I just it's an interesting thing to bring it up about Star Wars, but I think Star Wars does it better.
No, no, I hear what you're saying, and I think, I can't really speak to the Marvel stuff because I'm not a fan of that stuff, and I haven't really seen the vast majority of it. But I do get the sense that there's kind of a Marvel-like strategy with Star Wars in terms of creating like different sort of segments of the audience. Like, there's like WandaVision and like Loki and stuff like that where you don't necessarily have to watch the films that they put out to kind of enjoy those on its own terms. Um, at least so I'm told. I don't really know. But it is interesting. Like, do you think that Guardians of the Galaxy 3 was out of step with the first two movies? Because, like, there's a world where, and arguably we live in that world, but, um, episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, kind of goes to a very dark place that I don't know if episodes 1 and 2 would have prepared you for, the full grisly horror of what happens to Anakin Skywalker. But on that note, and again, I appreciate that you did just rewatch a year ago already, but I think that's sort of fine because I'm kind of more interested in the overall impressions. And I guess my main question is watching. So you watched episodes 1 through 9. So the Phantom Menace to the Rise of Skywalker. Is that right?
Yes, and Solo
And Rogue
and
One.
one.
So does the story hang together? Does it work as one long story, episode 1 to 9? I guess is my overall question when you watch it that way.
I would say for the most part, yes.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, it's clear that like this wasn't planned from the beginning, but I think it works.
Yeah, I mean there's some inconsistencies there,
Right.
but and some choices that I would have preferred not been made. But for the most part, I think if you look at it as a single piece, it probably works okay.
Well, to get more specific, does the Anakin downfall redemption thing play when you watch them 1 through 6. Like, because my question is always been like, it seems to me that this whole idea of Anakin falling from grace and then living a life as a villain and then his ultimate redemption by his son at the end of Return of the Jedi, to me is kind of like more of an intellectual idea that like has all of like the kind of components in the right places, but like I don't know if it's really yet emotional journey that you feel like you're going on with
Yeah.
the movies themselves.
I feel like his redemption arc is almost more like an in-world redemption arc,
Yeah.
like perhaps a piece of propaganda the rebellion would spread than necessarily what we witnessed. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, I get what you're saying. Yeah, it's kind of like, the rebellion could be like, and Darth Vader recanted at the very end, like in his dying breath, whatever. But yeah, I mean, like it's really interesting. Like the way that this character arc was arrived at was kind of completely backwards. Like it
Right.
just sort of, Darth Vader was not Anakin Skywalker when he made Star Wars. So
Right.
then, by that point in the saga, if you're watching 3 and then 4, you're watching with the knowledge that he was once a good guy. And there's kind of like very little, it seems to me, to really grab onto in Star Wars A New Hope that this is the same character who's struggling with any of the stuff that you'd seen in the previous 3 movies. It seems to
uh,
me.
I think I agree with that pretty much in its totality. I think what I would have preferred was no little Anakin. Phantom Menace picks us up on a young Anakin, like maybe late teens, early 20s. We get 2 movies of Anakin, and then the third prequel, he has his fall at the end of the second one, and he is Darth Vader
Mhm.
for the entirety of the third movie, and he gets a ton of screen time,
That's
and we
interesting.
see why he is feared, and but we also get to see that struggle while he's newly Vader, and then I think that would have given us the context for Return of the Jedi. Okay,
I
what's his total screen time in A New Hope and Empire? Right, it's
Well, that's interesting. Do you think you would have wanted to see him in the suit for the third movie?
yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. I think if you're going to go back and you're going to do the prequels, then you have to. It works in A New Hope and Empire because he's mysterious. He's this kind of looming figure that's in the background that you don't need it because he's a villain, and then what happens in Return of the Jedi is kind of enough. But if you're gonna add 3 movies of backstory, you kind of need more backstory for Anakin and for him to be conflicted. And so I would say, yeah, at the end, you end the second prequel movie on Mustafar with the duel with Obi-Wan, and you pick it up with him newly in the suit, and both the physical and emotional and mental struggles that he goes through, and then why he is this villain that is feared.
Yeah, that's interesting. What do you think about that, Allie? About that idea?
Yeah, I think that would have worked a lot better. The turn was my favorite of the prequels is episode 3, but that's almost like more frustrating because I feel like parts of it work and then all of a sudden I'm like, wait, what? How did he just turn so like I get what you're saying when you're like, all the parts are there, but does it work? Like the execution of it just doesn't work really at all. And so when you're watching it, it's also hard to like divorce yourself from the knowledge that 4, 5, and 6 were written and released and everything before 1, 2, and 3. And so
Yeah.
like, okay, this story wasn't written like this. So yeah, that part doesn't really work. Anakin's turn into Vader. Um and that's part of why I like all the supplemental stuff. Like, I know that a lot of people didn't like the Obi-Wan series, but
Who didn't like the Obi-Wan series? I love the
I
Obi-Wan
mean,
series.
Yeah, we loved
we
it.
did. But you
She's in the
know,
dark corners of the internet.
yeah, that's
Oh,
the problem. When I start like getting into a fandom, it started with Marvel stuff, and now I'm in Star Wars too, which is Star Wars is a lot
never
more.
Never
toxic.
read the comments. Never read the
Yeah, well, I
comments.
do. So a lot of people didn't like the Obi-Wan series, but I loved a lot of it, most of it. And yeah, Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor back, like their scenes were great. I mean, Ewan McGregor
Yeah.
was in a lot of it, but like Vader's scenes with him, they just worked so well. And like I love all that, filling in these gaps. Like I also think that's a really unique thing to Star Wars that I really like. Like Clone Wars filled in some gaps, and I feel like because that was so successful, like now, Mandalorian's starting to fill in some gaps between 6 and 7, and they're like going in these interesting directions to be like, well, this didn't really work, but how can we make it work with all these other pieces? Which I is in some ways you're like, oh my god, there's more. Like in order for this to work, I have to go back and watch this and this. But it like I don't know, that's like exciting to me because for some reason, even someone who like didn't love Star Wars as a kid, I mean, I've always had like a fondness for it probably through you, but like you like want it to work. The parts that are good are really good, and so the parts that are not as good are frustrating. So like
That's a really great way to put that, I think.
it's funny. So like watching 1, 2, and 3, especially, I'm like parts of I see what he was trying to do. It doesn't execution wise doesn't really work. And then I listened to your pod with Hal and was like, oh, okay. And I haven't been able to download those yet. Like if they were like more easily available.
Oh, you're talking about the HAL 9000 fan edits?
Yeah, like I really want to
Oh,
watch
well,
because the whole time we're watching them, I'm like, there's a better movie in here somewhere, and I'm sure that
let's talk after the recording and maybe they might find their way into your hands.
I love that people kind of do fill in the gaps or re-edit stuff because you just want things to work better than they do.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I think that, I was saying this on the Obi-Wan pod that we did. I think that series, really offers a compelling alternate universe where like that story, the emotional core of that show is really like a way that episode 4 of the saga could have played out with the prequel movies that we had. Like it kind of works as is, where you get this huge shift from episode 3 to 4, where it's like, oh, it's about his son now. It's not about him. Like that story's over. And now we're seeing things from a completely different point of view. But I feel like it's a very logical, it's like as a viewer, you want to see stuff like when Obi-Wan finds out that Anakin is alive and is Vader. Like you want to see
Right.
them confront each other in a real way, not in the way that they do in Star Wars A New Hope, when theoretically that's them seeing each other again. But in reality, that's not what the dynamics of that scene, that lightsaber duel that they have in Star Wars, is like, that is not the follow-up to what we see in episode 3. It's just not. That sort of emotional payoff is like what you would want to see in the next movie.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Obi-Wan series is closer to the episode 3 that Sean would have wanted.
Kinda.
Yeah.
And that's what's nice about all of these like supplemental pieces that are kind of coming in at all different points in the so far the Skywalker saga, but I know there's other things possibly in the works about being in Star Wars and not being in this time period or in this really revolving around this like main story. But yeah, like they are filling in the gaps and making it like more interesting and dynamic, and you sort of get it more a little bit. So it's
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of two minds about it, because obviously, like, if it's good, it's good, and if it's like Star Warsy, then it's Star Warsy. But I'm like, I kind of almost wish that, like, I don't know if Star Wars really exists beyond this moment in like the historical timeline of Star Wars. Like, I think like there's something really fundamental about the specific conflict and the personalities involved that I don't think Star Wars, outside of the quote unquote galactic civil war and like the generational conflict, it's like I just think that's something so central to what Star Wars is, that like, one of the announced films sounds kind of interesting, the Dawn of the Jedi movie, that's about like the beginning of the Jedi, like thousands and thousands of years in the past. Like that sounds cool, but like is it really Star Wars, or is it just like something that's in Star Wars clothing that they will call Star Wars that I will see because it is Star Wars, right? Does that make any
Yeah.
sense? Am I
Well,
articulating myself properly?
I think so. I think what you're saying is the empire and the conflict that revolves around the empire is pretty essential to for it to be Star Wars in a way that we recognize.
Yeah. Yeah, that's more or less what I'm saying. Yeah. And I don't think you can really escape like even the prequels for my money only really work as a prelude to that story, not a story in and of themselves.
Oh,
And maybe there was a version of those stories that could have worked on their own. But I find it personally very baffling. Apparently, George Lucas believes he said numerous times that the intended order to watch them is episodes 1 through 6. And I'm just like, that's not the most effective way to watch the story you told. It's just not.
because you're not like it doesn't grab you in 1 through 3 enough to continue. Is what you're saying?
Potentially, but I just think, the original trilogy is a better introduction to the world. I think that
Mhm.
the, like you were saying, Allie, the downfall of Anakin doesn't really. Well, I guess it's impossible to know how it plays without knowing what happens later. I mean, you would have to. It's like, with my daughter, I will maybe do an experiment, even though she already knows so much of like. So you sent her. Were you the one who sent her the Star Wars 5 minute stories?
No, I don't. I sent her the Search Your Feelings book,
Yeah.
and
Well, she loves all of them. The point is,
another one. I don't know. I don't think it was that one though.
yeah. She said to me the other day, she's like, "I like Star Wars, Daddy," and I was like, "Oh wow, okay." Well, uh, like she's recognizing things like because like she has like 4 or 5 Star Wars. No, she has 6 kids Star Wars things now, and they retell like little segments of the movies in like a children's storybook format, right? And like she remembers the different tellings from the different things. Like so, like she remembers there was a thing that was talking about the forest moon of Endor, and she was like, the Ewoks live there, and
Oh
I'm like,
my
how
god,
do you
that's
know?
so cute.
So I think that this hypothetical experiment that like one day she's going to watch Star Wars and not know what happens later is just already out the window because I
Yeah.
just think through osmosis, like she's going to piece it all together. And there's this phenomenon. I was talking to another friend of mine who has little cousins who are like really into Star Wars. And like she was trying to connect with them. Yes, Caroline, I'm talking about you if you're listening. Um, and she was like, yeah, like my favorite Star Wars is Return to the Jedi. Like, what do you think of that? And the kids are like, what is that? Right. So it's like, like you can be a Star Wars fan as a kid and not even have seen the movies.
That's exciting for them. Like they're so into something, and then you know their cousin is like, "Oh, there's all these movies," and then they get to watch it for the same time, already being super invested in the world. That's awesome.
No, it's true. It's very true. And I think, something I say a lot is that George Lucas says that he very intentionally sat down to create like a new mythology for children. And I think in that sense, he succeeded wildly, I think, beyond even his own expectations of what that actually means. It's like, Star Wars isn't just a series of very popular movies. It's even beyond something that, the lexicon has kind of entered pop culture, and it like really is like these ideas, these symbols, these it's like a place that exists where um it exists independent of itself. It exists independent of specific movies or specific entries in the canon. It's just a thing. It's this omnipresent, always there thing that is alive and vital, and that is as much a creation of, I don't want to call them fans because it makes it sound transactional, but like at this point, it's a creation of like the public imagination as much as it is whatever officially licensed property they release on Disney Plus or in movie theaters.
Yeah.
Seems to me.
No, that totally makes sense. So I don't know if when we did the rewatch, I was going based off of like my impression of Star Wars was like from growing up with you, or I did see the movies, but not, I wasn't like really super paying attention and like remembering everything when I watched one here and then another there, or if it was just like the society, like media, like knowing things just from it being around and a part of our culture now.
Yeah, well, for example, like everyone knows that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father.
Right.
I mean, even if you've never seen Star Wars, like you know that.
Yeah.
And like what's really interesting is that twist, quote unquote, has taken on this life in, cultural memory as like one of the greatest cinematic twists of all time. Yet the movies are fighting against the idea that it's a twist. Like if you're watching them 1 through 6
Mm,
or 1 through 9, whatever, they're not treating it as a twist.
right.
And I think it's a tricky thing when you're doing a prequel, it's especially to something that like is so firmly embedded in popular culture as Star Wars is, because like on the one hand, you want to do your own thing and not be beholden to what people think Star Wars is. But on the other hand, it's like the gravity of it is so strong you can't escape it. So like I don't know that the twist of Darth Vader being Luke's father is something worth preserving, like in the context of the movies, because it's already sort of blown up, as it were, because of just like existing in the world. It's just like up there with like, Rosebud or something. And I think the movie, well, I guess I'm talking myself into circles here because like I don't like that the prequels kind of destroy the narrative logic of The Empire Strikes Back, because the prequels do two things that make The Empire Strikes Back less effective. The introduction of Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back, you don't know that this is Yoda. I mean, even if you suspect, like that whole game he's playing where he's like some, silly little frog that is not
He's a space hobo.
right. Exactly. He's a space hobo. Like that reveal doesn't really work. And also obviously the reveal that Vader has been Anakin Skywalker this whole time doesn't really work. And it's sort of like it makes the audience ask questions for longer than I think they're meant to. Like, why is Yoda acting like this? How long is he going to be acting like this?
Mm. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Or like, what is he doing? It's like, why is he being so silly? Like, there is maybe a reading where it's like, oh my God, like, how long has Yoda been all alone on this planet? Like, has he really lost his mind?
I
Um,
do feel like that's a little bit how, like, I mean, I knew who Yoda was going into the rewatch and everything, but I did a little bit like, holy crap! Like the difference between Yoda in the prequels and Yoda in the original trilogies is stark. I think I commented that. I'm pretty sure I said something about that, like that, and then I was like, I like Yoda better in the original trilogy, and then I think you talked me into like, okay, but when he was younger,
He had a little bit
he
more vigor 18 years ago.
yeah, and I was like, all right, no, that tracks. It does track. I love Yoda in Empire, and I wish there was more of that in the prequels, but I understand like he's in a much different stage in his life and in different context of like the world he lives in has completely changed, or the universe he lives in has completely
Yeah, we don't know the
changed.
psychedelic properties of those frogs he's been eating.
that's true.
So,
That's true. We don't know what was in that stew he was making for Luke. Like, um,
I love that scene in Empire when I was a kid, by the way. When we first meet Yoda and then Yoda's hitting
yeah,
R2.
he's hitting R2 with the stick. Yeah.
Yeah. Mine, or I hope you not.
Actually, earlier you mentioned remembering us rewatching a scene with 3PO over and over. I
Hmm.
remember from high school when my friends and I rewatched Empire. Um, there's a scene where he's teaching Luke, where Yoda's teaching Luke, and he's saying "concentrate," and then he like falls. And
Concentrate.
and in high
Yeah.
school, we thought that was hilarious. Which like now I'm like really like I feel like when I was maybe a little younger than that, that should have hit that hard. But like we rewatched that like 4 or 5 times.
I mean, you never know how these things are going to hit.
Yeah, but
I
your story reminded me of that, and I'll just never forget that. I don't know why. It was good.
I think that's a testament to the puppeteers and
Oh
to
yeah,
Frank Oz.
Frank
Thank
Oz, yeah.
God, yeah. To your earlier point, Sean, I think I'm agnostic on whether or not Anakin should have been Vader in episode 3. Like, the formalist in me likes the sort of mirroring structure of, like, basically the idea is that Luke and Anakin are supposed to be paralleling each other, and it's just that they make different choices at different junctures. So part of me really likes that. I would hate to lose that, but I do see what you're saying. Oh, but also in service of that too, that's yet another reason why I do think that Anakin should have not been 9 years old in episode 1. He should have been a little older, closer in age to Luke in Star Wars: A New Hope. Not only in service of that structure, but also because, I said earlier that I find the arc of Anakin slash Vader to be kind of an intellectual idea. It's like more of an intellectual exercise and less of like a journey that I'm on along with this character. I
Mm-hmm.
don't really connect with it emotionally. And part of the reason is it's this character played by so many different performers, so many different actors, and you
Mm-hmm.
don't even have the same face to kind of empathize with for that long. Like, the young Anakin is played by 2 actors who are just not the same person. And I think, Hayden Christensen as the face of Anakin Skywalker, who's ostensibly the main character of these movies, you only see his face in 2 movies out of 6.
Hmm.
Right.
So you're losing 1/3 of his potential screen time by depicting him as a child with a younger actor. I feel like that really makes the story like more of an intellectual exercise and like less of a like, here's a character you're really supposed to empathize with.
Yeah. I think when you take that third away with the younger Anakin, the youngest Anakin, I think you're taking away like a third of his humanity, right?
Yeah,
He doesn't have a face. He doesn't have eyes. For 3 movies, except for that little bit there at the end of Return of the Jedi, spoilers, he doesn't have a human face. And then he has Hayden Christensen's face for 2 movies. But then there's that you're right. There's that whole movie where there's a face that you can't really relate to, and he's kind of a little bit of annoying, and you don't really see a connection between that youngest Anakin and that young adult Anakin. There's
right,
you don't see how this kid could go to this young adult. There's not really a bridge there that makes
right,
sense.
right.
I found it really jarring.
It is.
Yeah, but also I found it really jarring because I don't know if this was just like the culture or because obviously I'd seen 2 and 3. I know that Anakin and Padme get together, and so then watching 1, I'm like, what in the
Yeah,
what the
but
fuck? That's
yeah,
so
that
He's
that makes that very uncomfortable viewing.
child. It's not like they have any like weird chemistry in the first one or anything that makes it like, oh, was she
Right.
planning this all along? But it's still like the knowledge of it. You're like, I don't want to. That that made me super uncomfortable because I was just like, he's a literal child in this movie, and she's not. I mean, she's young, but she's not a child.
She's supposed to
They're
be
just
14. She's supposed to be 14 in that movie. Not that that really makes it any better, but no, I mean that's true as well, and that's why, the love story in the second one has so much heavy lifting to do because there could not have been any chemistry in the first movie
right.
because one of the characters was a literal child.
Right. Why did he make that choice? That just
He
seems very
says,
odd. Like you could have made them a similar age, and if they were both kids and like kind of, like, oh, and then as they grew up, like fell in like that would make sense. I just
yeah, I
why
mean
did
it
you
would work. It
do
would
that?
work. I mean, if you're gonna make Anakin a child, then make Padme at least played by a different actor so that
Yeah, that
they
was
seem
also
like they're
jarring.
on.
Is like you're like she looks not that much older, but
Yeah, she
like
looks exactly the same. Yeah,
Anakin is literally a different actor, and
yeah,
he's aged way faster, or like
The Padme that we see in episode 1 is the same Padme that
yeah.
we get in episode 2.
right.
The Anakin we get in episode 1 is not the Anakin we get in and there's no connection there.
Right.
No connection there whatsoever, which is weird too, because the idea, at least on paper, is that Padme's supposed to be 14 in episode 1 and 24 in episode 2.
Oh,
And
that
that
doesn't.
and that just doesn't come across at all. I mean, like you said, she seems like she's exactly the same character from 1 to
Yeah,
2.
because I think when we watched it, I was like really like, "What? This is like disturbing." Knowing that they get together, and you were like, "Yeah, but she's like only supposed to be a teenager here." Like you weren't like, "Oh no, this is great," but
Right.
I'm like that doesn't read at all. That
Well, so this is the thing.
he's so much younger in episode one.
The reason that George Lucas made him a child in episode 1, he says, is because he knew that a big reason for his fall was the attachment that he had to his mother. And when he loses his mother, he's unable to let go of that attachment. And he thought that that would make more sense if he was taken away from his mother as a child versus as somebody slightly older. I don't necessarily agree that that's true.
But you could have
Um,
done it a different way. You could have had like oh that's the very beginning of the movie, and then you know and
yeah,
then
yeah. I mean,
after, but still like the beginning ish to towards middle. Then you have like an older Anakin. Like I just focusing so much on this child for the whole movie, and then having this jump where it's just where like some like Padme is the same essentially, but for Anakin he's totally different. He's grown up so much.
I think some skilled flashbacks
Yeah,
would have done service enough to that, and having a
agreed.
younger actor in a flashback just makes sense.
we haven't really done flashbacks in Star Wars. It wasn't really in the vocabulary until, I guess, arguably The Last Jedi, but that's sort of later on. And even then, I think the flashbacks in Last Jedi are actually in keeping with the DNA of Star Wars, because it's like kind of a Rashomon thing, which is Akira Kurosawa, which is in the DNA of Star Wars. But that's a whole separate
Okay,
line of
thank you.
thought.
Yeah, you were saying a lot of words that I was like, I'm sure these are things
And
that.
some of them were Japanese. So
Sorry,
Yeah,
sorry. My
fine.
apologies.
John generally gets your references, so.
I guess in the interest of starting to wrap up here, I'm wondering, watching the movies in that chronological marathon you had, did your impressions of anything change, or were you surprised by anything on this viewing?
I think for me, it just kind of solidified the problems that I perceive to be in 1 through 3. So 7 to 9, I think for the most part fall pretty much in line. I do have some issues, but we don't have time for those. But that feels more organic to me than the prequels do, and probably part of that is that it's easier to make sequels than it is to make prequels. So, but I think like the scripting, the dialogue, I think the directing, there's some really great actors in there, and I feel like those are probably some of the worst performances that those actors give in their careers. And that's an opinion, but we know that Natalie Portman is an incredible actress, and even at that time, movies that she did around that, she really turns in a performance. And I think a little bit of like Mark Hamill. If you watch some of his old interviews, he talks about the dialogue and like the things that he still remembers that kind of torture him a little bit. And I feel like we see that in episodes 1 through 3. I found myself wanting episode 3 to go harder and darker
Interesting.
than it did.
That's pretty dark. I mean, he kills kids.
He kills kids. It's
I mean, off
yes,
screen. Off screen.
it's largely
Thank
off
God it's off
screen
screen.
and it's implied, and I think I'm okay with that. But I feel like even the reaction to that needs to be a little bit more like visceral.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Obi-Wan's, I mean, it's kind of like a famous meme line now when he's talking about the security footage and
Yeah.
stuff. And there's not enough there. And I know the Jedi are kind of supposed to be removed and not emotional, but if anything's going to make you emotional, it has to be your apprentice killing 30 kids on camera.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And Padme's reaction to that news needs to be more, because she shouldn't have any kind of like training or like emotional barrier to that. And I don't know. I think 3 needed to go at least a little bit darker, and all of the political stuff needed to be like punched up in a way that made people like want to watch it and make more sense.
Yeah, I just wish it was more cohesive. Yeah, I definitely wish the political stuff made more sense because the trade stuff could be super interesting if it was done well. Also, Anakin kills. I mean, sort of understand the thing about his mother passing away, but then he kills innocent people, and they're in episode 2, and I feel like no one. They're like, oh, that's not great, but they're not human, so eh. And you're like,
Yeah,
eh. And that hit really hard after we had watched Book of Boba Fett,
Yeah.
right.
and like I said, episode I think 2, where they
Yeah. The second episode. Yeah.
give. I'm really sorry that I'm blanking on their species name, and I don't want to call them
The Tusken Raiders.
the Tusken Raiders. Yeah, I didn't want to. I mean, I can say it, but I don't want to refer to them as the Sand People.
Yeah. Because
Um,
it just seems like a racial
now,
slur. Yeah. It
yeah, and so
does.
like that kind of stuff is interesting, but also like upsetting. Watching it now, like episode 2, he kills the Tusken Raiders, and like even then you go back and watch the original trilogy, and Luke is talking about the Sand People, and you're just like these fucking white people. I don't know. I just
Yeah. No, I mean, it's weird. Like, and we talk about this on our episode 2 pod and our episode 3 pod, so I won't rehash it in too much detail. But yeah, there's some unexamined, I think, racism that is imported in service of paying homage to things that George Lucas was a fan of. That I think, especially after that specific episode that you're referring to, that does a lot to flesh out the Tuscans and make you see them more as people, is
right.
certainly much more problematic in light of that.
There's also like I feel like Chewie in the original trilogy doesn't get his due. First of all, he doesn't get a medal. That's not okay.
Well, that's one of the things that Rise of Skywalker, we're all thankful that Rise of Skywalker swooped in at the very end to right that wrong.
Um,
I
and
say
then
with
and
some
Leia like
sarcasm.
talks down to him in a way that seems like feels very racist. Also, I don't remember what she says, but
Somebody get this big walking carpet out of my way.
yes,
No
and
reward is worth this.
you're like, okay, in this universe, like aliens are kind of like different races. Like you don't, and that just feels super shitty.
I'd rather kiss a Wookiee.
That's the one I was thinking of.
That can be
I just
arranged.
yeah.
That's the one I was thinking of. I'd rather kiss a Wookiee. Yeah,
Oh, yeah. Well,
just like, come on, Leia.
Well, yeah, I
Which-
mean, I think that's interesting. I think it speaks to the levels of, implicit sort of casual racism that was just, cost of doing business in a way that is less, I feel very similar about Star Trek. Whenever Dr. McCoy makes fun of Spock's ears or his green blood or something, I'm like, you're being really racist, you good old Southern boy, you. Like
Yep.
it's very, very uncomfortable. And it's also uncomfortable how everyone just kind of laughs it off.
First interracial kiss on American television, but you
Yeah.
green-blooded bastard.
Yeah.
There's, sometimes it's done to like sort of point something out. And I don't ever feel like in Star Wars it's done to be like, oh, isn't this horrible? I do. In episode 2, when he kills the Tusken Raiders, I do think that's a little bit like, oh, here's a glimpse of he has some darkness to him.
Yes.
But I don't think it's like, oh, he committed a hate crime. Like, I don't think that it went there, but
No, it certainly didn't go there because he confesses his crime to Padme, who basically says, and we all make mistakes. It's like,
right.
The movie itself isn't
Right, like if the movie or series or whatever is condemning it,
right.
that's one thing, But if it's just, this is fine. It's just how it is. Like that's not great.
Oh, which I will point out, something that HAL 9000's fan edit of episode 2 does that's really a very elegant solution is he still has Anakin kill the Tuskens, but he cuts out the scene where he tells Padme about it. So then it just becomes this thing that the audience now knows he's capable of, but nobody else knows. And Padme certainly doesn't know.
Yeah, that works a lot better. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to wrap up, so Shawn, so it sounds like for you, it just kind of reaffirmed the issues that you had originally. And ALLIE, it seems like in a lot of ways, like this was the first time you were really watching them
It was,
with,
yeah.
with a critical eye.
Yeah, definitely.
Sean, that actually leads me to believe, I know we're going over time here, but that leads me to wonder, like, why didn't you, what what was your thinking behind the chronological showing of the movies? Like, you could have left out the prequels, you could have shown the originals first, you could have like done the machete order or something, which I've always been very curious about how that would play.
Um, I didn't really know about the machete, or I think I've heard it referred as the butcher order. I didn't really know about that, and then when I learned about it, my understanding was the main purpose of that was to preserve the twist in Empire Strikes Back.
Well, I think it does a little more than that. I think it makes it more about Luke. Like, Luke is still the main character, right?
Mm.
Like, because then it does two things. So basically, for anyone who isn't familiar with the machete order, like, the machete order is, you basically exclude Phantom Menace so you can watch it if you want. Well, you watch Star Wars, which is episode 4, follow it up with The Empire Strikes Back episode 5. Once you learn that Darth Vader is actually Anakin Skywalker, you go back, you watch episode 2, Attack of the Clones, next, and then episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and then you watch Return of the Jedi. So what happens at the end there too is it does something really interesting where you just saw how Anakin chose, how he becomes Vader, and you find out about the twins, and then you see the resolution in the next movie. So you see the confrontation between the father and the son. There's a lot of mirroring in episode 3 and episode 6, like the whole duel in the throne room is very similar. In episode 3 where he kills Count Dooku in front of Palpatine, which is ostensibly what Palpatine is trying to get Luke to do in Return of the Jedi. He's trying to get him to kill Vader and take his place. So yes, it preserves the twists, but it kind of does something interesting at the end where it like actually kind of heightens the stakes of Return of the Jedi by more closely linking it to Revenge of the Sith.
Mm.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. It might have just been like laziness. It seemed chronological order seems like the order that to watch it in, and I think with Allie really loving Rogue One.
Yeah, Rogue One's my favorite.
Yeah, Rogue One is up there. It's quite good.
Sean, I love it.
That's a discussion for maybe another podcast. But I don't dislike it. I have some complaints.
Well, I would love to hear those complaints on the Rogue One episode that we will inevitably do.
Yeah, invite Sean back.
Any closing thoughts? Sean, just because I'm dying of curiosity, do you happen to recall where the flip over was in the laser discs of A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back? Like, what scene? Because I bet you remember exactly where it was.
You know, I have been really racking my brain for like the last week trying to remember where it is, and I haven't wanted to look it up. And I haven't. My memory's super terrible. For some reason, right now on the spot, when you ask me, I think it's in the trash compactor. But I'm not 100% sure. Like, I think it might be right when they come out of the trash compactor.
Okay.
But I don't know if that makes sense, like movie length wise.
No, well, because it doesn't have to be exactly halfway. It just has to be at a natural place where it wouldn't feel like you're stopping in the middle of something. So that
Yeah,
actually seems like a natural place for it.
I feel like I'm probably wrong, but gut instinct when they come out of the trash compactor.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go look it up and I'll include that in the show notes. Um, well, on that note, thanks so much for having this conversation with me, guys. It was a fun one. I didn't know exactly where it would go, but I think we said a lot of interesting stuff. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And if you like what you heard, please visit trashcompod.com where you can find transcripts of this episode and all of our other episodes. If you have any thoughts, comments, or critiques, well, you can keep the critiques yourself. But if you have any thoughts or comments, please send us an email at trashcompod@gmail.com. We are Trashcompod across all social media, and we will see you on the next one.